You're listening to Parasearch Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or their affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Concept Show. I'm your host, Paul Rook, and on tonight's show, we are joined, as ever, by the lovely Kerry Greenaway. Hello, Kerry.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm all right, thanks.
Good. Did you have a good week?
I'm not all right. I've got girl flu. I'm lying. I'm a poorly girl.
How dare you lie to me? On air as well. That's disgusting.
I know. I'm sorry.
I'll see you on the naughty step later.
I'm not that poorly. So forgive me if I'm snotting and coughing all the way through the show, everybody.
Yeah. And tonight's show, apparently Kerry's been telling everyone it's the American Outback. It's not.
That's how much my brain is in mush.
Oh dear, no, we're going to go to the Australian Outback instead. And because it's all to do with Australia, we have also joined by Richard Clements.
Hi guys, how are you? The American Outback, I like that. A very good Kerry. Yeah.
I've been researching the American Outback all day, so I think I'm in the wrong country for some reason. No wonder I couldn't find a lot about it. I mean, come on now.
And I like my qualification to coming on this show, the fact that I lived in Australia for 9 years. There was nothing more to it. But unfortunately, I've got Kerry's notes in front of me, so I should be able to follow along at least.
Well, you never know. It was about the American Outback. You never lived there.
No, I never lived there, no.
Oh, dear.
So Kerry's going to be talking about the wrong continent. Should be ashamed of yourself.
I know.
Oh, I don't know. We're going all the way to the Northern Territory of Australia tonight for the show, and it is the single largest monolith rock in the world, and it's got a height of 346 metres, and it runs about 2 miles in length. How about that? How about that pebble?
That's a big pebble.
That is. Yeah, and the Aborigines believed that it was delivered by aliens.
Well, probably. I've actually flown over.
Sure, I didn't put that in the research.
Well, I've got another website as well.
It is actually red sandstone, which is what gives it that colour. It's very iconic because of the colour change that it goes through while the sun's reflecting on it throughout the day. So it'll go from like a light pink colour, and then sometimes it goes to like a dark grey colour if it's wet. So, and that's all to do with the type of stone it is. Thoroughly interesting.
It tells the weather as well. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
It tells the weather as well. So if it's dry, then it's sunny. Mm-hmm. If it's wet, it's raining. If it's white, it's snowing. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
If it's surrounded by dust, it's windy.
They're just getting silly.
It's got to be one of those shows, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll give the Dark Mirror show a run for their money tonight, I think.
No, I think this is really interesting, and I'll tell you where the topic came from. Was we were sitting just having a chat one night, and we were talking about films, weren't we, lads? And we were talking about old films that we'd seen, and I was talking about a film that I'd seen years ago called Picnic at Hanging Rock, and I always thought that was Ayers Rock, and we got into this big discussion about this particular area, didn't we, guys?
We did, yeah.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So what do you remember about this film? Because I haven't seen it first.
Well, basically, it was written like some Victorian schoolgirls go to have a picnic there and they climb it. But when they climb it, one of them disappears. And it's the mystery of where did she go, how did she go. Where did she go? Because she disappears into thin air. Now, there's lots of theories about aliens and stuff like that to do with Ayers Rock, but to be fair, when I was actually researching this earlier on, it wasn't really the UFO side of things I came across. It was to do with the sacredness of the site, because it's so personal to the Aborigines, Ayers Rock in particular. It's one of their most sacred sites. And when you read about the mythologies we'll go into further down the show, throughout the show, that is about preserving that way of lifestyle. Now, there has been, as you guys all know, territory rights between settlers and Aborigines have been going on for years, and in some places still going on, but this is one of the sites they've been able to claim back. And it's important, I feel, that we should not encroach on people's culture and religious or sacred belief systems to do with the land, because their Aborigines are very tied to the land, and they have to be, because it's survival. But it's like with every culture, without today's society, when you're living off land and you're surviving, then these mythologies and this folklore build up, and you have sacred sites. We see the same with the Native Americans in America. The indigenous people have had their rights stripped away from settlers, and they're fighting to get them back. And I think it was 1975 they finally was able to reclaim part of this area, which includes Ayers Rock in it. So I think that's a really good thing.
Yes, certainly. Sort of when I was living in Australia, I mean, there's still, and as you said, Kerry, there's still a bit of work to be done to sort of right the wrongs and sort of get everything in balance. But Ayers Rock, or Uluru as it's now known as, is a very good case in point. It's one of the success stories for the sort of the indigenous population. They have total control over the rock now, and they haven't sort of closed it off to tourists, but sort of respect, not climbing it and stuff like that. And it's a very well balanced, well managed sort of situation over there now.
Yeah, they've managed to get that balance, haven't they, between the tourisms, and their lifestyle, which, as you say, is incredibly important, because people are interested in these things to go and see them. I mean, considering, you've got to understand, actually, that this is not this is in the middle of nowhere. It's a long travel to get to this place, to sightsee this place, isn't it?
Yes, so a lot of people think it's sort of just outside of Alice Springs, but no, it's about 400 miles outside of Alice Springs. To travel anywhere in Australia, you have to travel a long way to get to.
So it's not far then.
No, but that's relatively short distance in Australian terms. But as for Uluru, I've never actually visited the place myself, but I've flown over it at quite high altitude, and it is visible from up there. You are aware you're flying over it, and it even looked quite impressive from up there.
I have to say, even just photographs of it look impressive, don't they? It's very iconic in the mind. It's one of those, once you've seen it, whether it be photographed on a film or whether you've seen it flying over or something, there's always something about it that sticks in your mind about Ayers Rock.
The main iconic thing now, and what the tourists and everyone go there to see, is what you touched upon earlier, are the sunrises, the sunsets, and how the rock literally seems to change throughout the day. That is the big draw now. It really, I've seen time lapse and photography of it and stuff like that. But to actually be there and sort of witness it, just set up your camp chair first thing in the morning and just sit back and let it go throughout the day.
Watch your tinnies, have your tinnies while you're watching the rock. And you say, right, now this is the laugh of it, right, is people say, I'm batshit because I look at my rocks. Yet people will sit there for 12 hours watching the sun play on this big rock.
Yeah, but it's a big rock. Ice matters in rocks, obviously.
According to this website that I've got in front of me, right, it says that Uluru was probably formed by the slow erosion of the original mountain range. and there's no soil on top of it.
No.
And it's full of caves, canyons, cracks, water holes, and other natural formations, as well as ancient paintings and carvings.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it is quite important to the Aboriginals as it's part of their heritage as well.
One interesting thing I did find out, sorry to interrupt, was there is actually shrimp on there. On the top, when it rains, there's like holes that fill up, and shrimp come out, do their thing while it's wet, and then they lay their eggs, and then the legs can lay dormant for 7 years on top of that rock. How weird is that?
I know, but that's not the only place that's happened. The other day I was watching Ancient Aliens, and they were talking about another mountain range, and I can't for the life of me remember where it was, but it's like so many 100 feet above sea level, and yet there's a lake up there that is full of fish and stuff, seahorses, I think they said it was, full of seahorses, and you'd expect them obviously to be in the sea, not a giant lake that's not connected to anything high above in the mountains, So these sort of places still do exist.
It's like it creates the perfect environment for these creatures to still to exist in these conditions, and it's just isn't nature amazing? I have to say, nature is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Living in Australia, it is a very unique ecosystem. They are having a lot of problems with the introduced species and stuff, but the ecosystem that is there with animals, insects and stuff, they are very adaptable and very hardy, where you have to be to survive in a climate like that. But, it is quite unique. And, like you say, shrimp on the top of Ayers Rock in the middle of a continent the size of Australia, that takes quite some doing.
I was
for the shrimp.
I actually thought that was a fake. That was fake. When I first read it, I thought, well, that's fake, surely. But I went to different sites, and they were all saying it, and they were all like tourism kind of sites that were advertising and not like disclosed.uk or whatever. You know what I mean? It was like there were different sites. It was really weird. I found it strange. But it was the first non-Aboriginal person to see it, really, was a guy called Ernest Giles. Now, he was leading a party near Kings Canyon in 1872, and the largest dome is Mount Olga, and he named that. He sort of ignored the fact that he already had a name. He named it after Queen Olga of Württemberg, wherever that is. Where's that? Württemberg. Sounds like Germany.
One of the German principalities at the time.
Mm-hmm. And then in 1873, another explorer, William Gosse, saw Uluru, named it Ayers Rock, after the Chief Secretary of South Australia, Sir Henry Ayres.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Then in 1894, this is Western people, by the way, we'll go back in time in a minute. In 1894, there was a party was sent out basically to look for the geology, mineral resources, plants, animals, all that sort of thing, to collect that information regarding the area. But they decreed that the region wasn't suitable for farming, so it kind of got left alone, really, because it just wasn't suitable.
Mm.
Yeah, I can quite understand why they think it wasn't suitable for farming. It's a very barren land out there.
Yeah, it's very flat, and
you might as well be on the moon.
Maybe it is.
No, that's a whole different conspiracy.
Yeah, I'll let you run with that on Friday night.
Yeah, maybe we'll go with something like that on a Friday. It's the sort of topic we do.
Show.
Yeah.
Now, the Aboriginal tribe of the area. Now, I'm going to apologise right now for the pronunciation of this one. I'm going to only do it once, so make the most of it.
Get ready to click replay.
Pit Jijiara.
Janjidiara.
Mm-hmm. But their last bit is Anganu. Anangu.
Yeah. and Angus.
Yeah, that do.
So from now on, we're just going to call them the second bit because we can say that better.
Yeah. This is the tribe, isn't it? The local tribe.
Yeah, this is the local Aboriginal tribe that live in that area, and this is their sacred site. So they're actually, one thing I will say about the Aboriginals, they're very secretive about their stories, their folklore. So you get like you get the outskirts of it, but not the in-depth of it. That's one thing I did notice looking through for information, was that there was a lot of well, this is what we reckon, but not gone into any depth, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
I think they're a very spiritual and astrological race, I think, because a lot of their stories are spiritually based, but come from the stars.
Well, they've managed to preserve a lot of their, because although they're integrated into society as well these days, they're not just living on the land like we imagine from Crocodile Dundee. Although some do still live that way.
Yeah.
Awesome film. You call that a knife? This is a knife. It's one of the most iconic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, we're off topic.
I mean, they still do practice their traditions, and they've kept their history alive, so to speak. It's, you know, they do.
They still
respect
have
their
own
elders
language as well. They still have their own language, so their customs and their rituals and stuff like that are passed down from generation to generation, and it's word of mouth, generally in those cultures now, and their own language. But they've managed to preserve that, even though a lot of them are like living Western wise. They have their own settlements, so they are more integrated into today's society. But they've still managed to preserve their culture, which is fantastic. And the name Anangu actually translates as people. So the people, they class themselves as the people.
Yeah. Well, one of their local legends about Uluru, they believed that it had resulted from the intervention of gods when divine beings emerged from the void and created all life on Earth. And it said that two tribes of astral beings had a big battle to the death in this area over a beautiful lizard woman. I had no idea what that was.
Lizard woman.
As a result of the battle, the Earth rose in its grief and thus created Uluru. So it's basically to plug up this massive void to stop these alien being race, subterranean beings or whatever they are, coming up and carrying on. So it's almost like the Earth had had enough. It's like, right, bang your heads together. You down there, you up there, but get on.
I think you're right. I do think you're right. But I also, when you say this, it just cross cultures across so many things. And you was talking to me a little while ago about something called the cosmic egg, where things were born from the Earth. The Earth actually bore our races and our gods and goddesses. And this is one of the things that reminded me of that legend that you were talking about.
Yeah.
Because it's the dreamland, isn't it, that they all believe in?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said to you, they are a spiritual race as well. So, yeah, it all sort of ties in. But you also got a lot of UFO sightings as well around that area. I don't know if you found any.
I didn't, actually. The only thing I found was, which wasn't really a rock area, it was sort of like across the flat plains, and it just reminded me of the will-o'-the-wisps that we see in the boglands in England, where there were lights was in. They're called min lights. But other than that, I didn't really go too deep down you know me and the UFO world. I'm more likely to go down the myths and legends route than I am anything to do with ufology, but believe it or not. But yeah, I mean, they do see strange lights. I mean, Richard, you were telling us about that the other night.
Yeah, the min is a generic term which is used for the lights across Australia, but they are sort of principally sort of connected to Queensland, but certainly where I lived in the state of South Australia in Adelaide, and there was a lot of reports of the min happening along the South Australian highway between Adelaide and Perth, which crosses the Nullarbor Plain. And if there's anything, these lights seem to occur on flat plain lands, sort of huge, nothing too mountainous or anything. And there's reports, and they can vary as sort of like orbs of light, spheres of light, sort of following cars or being seen in the distance, to sort of incidences where it's the dead of night and the whole area will light up as bright as day, and just literally just light up. It's like a prolonged flash of lightning, I suppose. I mean, this can go on for minutes. You'll be bathed in a total sort of bright light, and there does seem to be one characteristic, because the Aboriginals do actually fear these lights, and there does seem to be one characteristic when these appear is, even with Westerners, when they see them, they're accompanied by a huge sense of dread and fear, as opposed to more sort of like UFO sightings. You can be a bit puzzled or sort of, but these tend to cause real apprehension and fear factor.
That's interesting, because when you listen, we've talked about the sky trumpets, the sky noises that people were hearing around the world. They couldn't explain them, could they? But it was to do with the Earth movement, and they reckon that's what was causing the noises in the sky. So, something to do with acoustic or that sort of thing, wasn't it? So it makes me wonder if it is to do with the activity post-Earth creating higher powered electrical fields that are charging off, which would give you the light. And because the higher fields, maybe that's what's causing the sense of dread. Who knows, right? It
certainly sounds like it. When I sort of looked into it, well, I didn't look into it in depth, but I was sort of like curious about this sort of when I was living in Australia. And there seems to Australia's a very low-lying continent. It's not that far above sea level at its highest point. And whether geologically that has some effect, you're a lot closer to sea level wherever you are. And I'm trying to sort of explain it better, but it's a very low-lying continent. Again, it's unique in that factor. There's not high mountain ranges or anything like that. I think the highest sort of spot you can be in Australia is literally sort of 900 feet above sea level, which isn't very high.
But are you saying then that you think that some of these lights are a bit like the Northern Lights and the Southern Lights, but you hit the atmosphere from below as opposed to above?
Yeah.
I would think geological factor involved in them, as opposed to sort of like the Northern Lights or the Southern Lights, the Aurora Australis or the Aurora, the other one, and which is an astrological effect. It's the Earth,
because it's being hit from space as opposed to the ground. That's what I'm saying. So rather than being bombarded from above, it's being bombarded from below.
Oh, so, I see what you mean. Yes, quite possibly.
But then it's not. They're not. The lights are not going to be centralised like a spotlight from a UFO sort of thing.
No, but we have got.
When talk about UFOs,
but that's why I said it was like interested me about the will-o'-the-wisp of these being min lights, because people, it's almost like the same concept. It's like people feel the need to follow them and then go missing when they followed them. Whereas in the UK, if you think about the will-o'-the-wisp, it was always about don't follow the light because it's trying to draw. It's a trickster. It's going to drag you off the path, so you get stuck in the bog. Do you know what I mean? So it's almost like the same thing, but in a different environment.
Yeah. No, that does make sense, actually, yeah.
Unlike sort of the more traditional UFO sort of sighting, these lights, from what I can gather, do not appear to be intelligently controlled, per se. They don't sort of, they sort of look like appear, you sense they're there. There's no real interaction. They don't land and you don't go up to them. They're sort of around you. They just let you know that they're there, and this sort of sense of fear, which is quite prevalent. That is the one thing I came across a lot. There's a lot of sort of outback sort of trackers and stuff like that. Some quite hardy sort of big Aussie guys, and they have been involved in instances with the Midland Lights, and they are, and some of them won't even venture back out certain parts of the outback because of.
But this isn't really centred around Uluru, which is what the area we're talking about, really. So let's go back to that. Paul?
Another sort of legend that I found, especially with the Ananangu tribe, it does actually say that a long time ago they believed that Uluru landed upon the desert plain from the sky. UFO occupants also wish to meet and greet both New Zealand and Australia's current civilizations. At the time possessed UFO landings in many other areas, including New Zealand, and perhaps choosing Uluru as well.
Well, that's nothing to do with the site I found. I found a more mythological route, which was coming from the Earth.
There's lots of different versions.
Yeah, I'm more likely to believe that they thought this one, though, than an alien. I don't think that.
Well, no, they're just saying for this particular one that there are lights seen around and landing around Uluru, but they do, some of the Ananangu tribe do actually think that it came from the sky.
Oh, okay.
So did it just fall from the sky, or was it placed there carefully?
Who knows? But it is sandstone, so I wouldn't have thought it's come from the sky.
No, it's certainly a rock.
We do know what it is. It's not, it's not that we don't know. It's not like they've done tests and gone, oh, it's hollow, and like the moon. Do you know what I mean?
No, but they do know that it's full of caves and stuff. So
it is full of caves, and actually, a lot of the evidence for the legend is evidence. It's not really evidence. It's a story. Is in the rock. Petroglyphs that are scattered throughout these. This tells the story of the ancestors through these rocks. Now, the petroglyphs, cave drawings, basically, are fascinating in their own right. But I want to just concentrate on this origin that you keep talking about, because they have a thing called the dream time. That the dreaming is the period of creation for when the world took shape and life began. And this is the story that's told in these petroglyphs, not something coming down from outer space. I don't like the ufology side all the time, because it takes things like this and twists it a little.
Yeah.
To make it fit their narrative rather than the true narrative of what the Aboriginals are saying. And yes, that might have evolved through generations who were up and coming through the Aborigines going, well, actually, it sounds very similar to that. It's a possibility that that's an explanation for our ancient stories, as much as the woo-woo, I suppose you'd like, story. I mean, that is no more disbelieving than something being born from the earth, like coming out of the earth and, doing what they did. That's no more an alien coming from outer space or it coming from beneath the earth. It's kind of, you can't go, I believe that one, but I don't believe that one, because they're sort of equally thing. But the petroglyphs do show their story in regard to the mythology more than the ufology side of things.
Do you not think, though, that they could be, this whole Uluru scenario of being the birthplace of the whole of life on Earth, be some sort of false memory? Because science has already discovered, well, they claim that all life began at, where was it? The cradle of life. Isn't that in Africa?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, could they not have experienced all what they're talking about in Africa, and as the human race have expanded and gone elsewhere, they're sort of remembering what happened in Africa, but likening it to what's happening in Australia with Uluru. And they're just as time's gone on, they've obviously changed the history, so to speak.
I don't know. I think it's to answer that question. I don't know.
Going back to what you were saying, like with the dream time, that's sort of something I sort of like looked into. It is a very fascinating sort of subject, and the Aboriginal sort of view of the creation and stuff. You know, I'm not in favour of sort of just dumping it on the ancient alien type sort of. It's too simple. It's too, that's too simple. I mean, the dream time is a very abstract concept. And, this sort of like, and the Aborigines do pay a lot of stock to it. I mean, it involves a lot of animals and symbology. The animals sort of inhabit the earth, and then they came out, particularly serpents and stuff like that, created the rivers, the mountain ranges, and sort of like this is what sort of like created their sort of landscape, and it's all connected to this period of time, which they universally call the dream time.
Mm. They believe that the spirits of ancestral beings that were asleep beneath the ground actually emerged from the earth during this time. Mm. They wandered across the land, and some of these ancestral beings took on the forms of humans, animals, plants, stars, wind, everything. They decided what they wanted to be and became that. So they believed they created what they wanted to become. So that's just an energy being that can become what it wants to be. And that's more a thought pattern of we created ourselves because we believed.
Yeah, that certainly does sort of follow that sort of... It certainly seems like it comes from the human psyche as opposed to being sort of outside influence. I mean, I can sort of see how sort of that sort of depiction of how the world, your world around you, it became. I can see that actually being generated from the collective human psyche and as opposed to having it sort of just saying, it came from outer space or something like that.
I mean, if you're going back to the cradle of life in Africa, there is talk of a land bridge that goes from the Indonesians over into the Australians, which is where they think a lot of these things come. And there is actually a mythology regarding the dingo that's supposed to have crossed this land bridge with them. So if you're looking at, if it's come from that kind of, like you said, like the dilution down, as it were, or the immigration down through the land bridges and stuff like that, and these people are coming, then they're going to use myths and stories and legends and make it fit the landscape. I mean, they said that these ancestral beings created the environment around them. So everything in Australia that was natural was created from the ancestral beings. And where they ended up laying or living in, they are still inhabiting there as an ancestral being. And that's why these sites are so sacred, like Ayers Rock or Uluru itself is an ancestral being. It's not a rock. It's an ancestral being, and stories and things have grown up around this, and like you say, each face of the rock itself has a different legend attached to it, and it's part of that ancestral being. I have to say, when I was looking at this this particular location, I wasn't finding much on the ufology point. I kind of didn't go down that route, because for me this is more of the earth, being of the earth, not anything to do with the external of that. Anyway, that's mine.
That is basically, you've literally hit the Aboriginal viewpoint square on the head. I mean, that is it. That is sort of how they view their sort of world around them. They won't, as far as I'm aware, they won't subscribe it to an external force coming in. I think they're perfectly aware that the world around them is part of them, because you look at their sort of practices and stuff. They are at one with the world and with the world around them. I mean, the outback. You, me, Paul, any Westerner wouldn't survive sort of, a week or so out there.
Wouldn't even survive a day, mate, I tell you. I can guarantee I wouldn't even survive a day.
Aboriginal tribes and stuff,
I've done my survival training. I'd be all right.
They flourish out there. There's nothing.
Yeah, I've done survival training. I'll be fine.
Oh, you'll be fine.
I'll be maybe 3 weeks.
You just need a tent and you're off.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Crocodiles and snakes and big spiders and scorpions and God knows
That's
what
all
else
right.
out there.
I'll have myself a new set of boots, crocodile skin boots. Be well away.
Oh, I could just see it now. Bless.
I bet.
Oh dear. Anyway.
So yeah, go on.
No, your turn.
I was about to say, so tell us more about what this dream time stuff is. What is it?
It's about them coming up from the earth and creating
Okay.
the environment around them. I mean, one of the Aboriginal groups tells of a story about the ancestral beings, and they're talking about ancestral beings, and everybody straight away in their head sees human form. But you've got to, this is energy form. This isn't human form. Ancestral beings is an ancestral energy. I kind of want to put the word energy in there rather than a being, because straight away people go human.
Yeah.
And that's
It's
kind
like
of not
people,
what it is.
It's like when you mention aliens, people always just envisage the alien greys.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
There's so many life forms out there that are alien to us,
Yeah,
but not necessarily.
Well, we had a
Even down to
discussion
the
on a Dark
micro.
Mirror show, and Mark was really splitting hairs by saying alien just means anything we're not comfortable with, or we're not come across before, that we're not familiar with. And I went, no, when you talk about aliens, like in this environment, straight away you're seeing alien beings from outer space. Straight away, that's your mental mindset jump. And that's a bit the same with this one. So when they're talking about ancestral beings, they're talking about energy beings, and that were taking the form of whatever they wanted to take the form of. So one of these particular ancestral beings, for example, was in the form of a snake. And the snake sent bats for humans to eat. So you're talking about two completely different races. So I can understand why the ufology world has taken it, but they've twisted it, because it's an energy form, not another being. Does that make sense? Because it's actually in the form of a snake.
I don't think the Aborigines are that much different to like the ancient, the Red Indians, and over in America.
They're very close to their own
like
environment too.
Yeah, it's slightly different path, but there's still the outcomes are pretty much almost the same.
Yeah, you get them, Richard.
I can see coming from Paul. Well, I think from what I sort of like experienced out there and stuff, I mean, the Aboriginal sort of race is very unique. That you can't sort of, they're not Polynesian. It's a very unique sort of product. I mean, they're very unique to Australia.
In the aspect,
no different though from the Native Americans being unique to America. When you start looking at it like that, every country has got their own unique, indigenous culture within it. So anyway, this snake sent bats for the humans to eat, but bats were flying so high that the people couldn't capture them. Snake was like, oh God, I messed up a bit there. So actually gave up one of his ribs, and that was what created the boomerang, which was the weapon now that, it's famous for Aboriginals, is the boomerang. So these stories are coming through, and a lot of this information is from what the Aborigines have told people and introduced, allowing Westerners to try and understand their cultural beliefs. And obviously these stories are mapped out in the petroglyphs that are on the walls that are there. It's absolutely fascinating place, I have to say. One of the most horrifying stories I thought, and this is about knowledge, is in the early days of tourism, they used to throw water on the cave paintings to highlight them more. But of course, they're not made of like the pigmentations that they were using can erode. So they're throwing water on them, and they've eroded a lot of them, but they're still there. They've stopped that practice now, I would just like to say that. But some of the cave paintings that they've found, they reckon could be like 30,000 years old. That's crazy when you think about it. So I had to have a look into what they did the cave paintings with, because I just kind of thought it was like mud. But it's to do with dyes. So they would replace materials of, let's say, crush, and then mix with water and animal fat. And there would be red, yellow, orange, white, grey and black. So there's quite a variety of colour as well.
Yeah.
So you've got ochre, red and yellow are ochre, and they're iron-stained clays, which stains the rocks. So that's why they've been so enduring after all this time. And then there's kukara, which is desert oak, and black charcoal gives you the black, and then ash, white ash, gives you the white. So that's where they got their colours from. But that's a lot of effort to go for writing on a wall. That shows you how sacred they are, because the effort that takes to create that, to tell their stories.
Yeah, that certainly is. It's sort of even today. I mean, sort of outback explorers and stuff. You know, not all the petroglyphs and stuff have been found. There's still a lot out there, and they will come across. And it seems that when they were originally sort of done, the people that done it were aware that they were there to last a long time, because they tend to put them in shady parts where there's no direct sunlight, you know, so they were sort of like hence sort of caves or overhangs or sort of little gullies, so to protect them from the sunlight, and as if they knew, you know, that they would fade over time. And as you said, Kerry, these and some of these paintings are over 30,000 years old.
Oh, which is crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, I've just been reading about the different colours that they used. And, yeah, I mean, they had, like, red, yellow, which they were iron-stained clays, black and white ash. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see them, though.
And then say the stories get told through this. Now, there is another climbing. Uluru has been very popular in the past, but I believe in 1985 they stopped the practice out of respect for the sacred journey that the young Aboriginals used to take up. Now, this sounds to me. Now, this is the ritual is they climb. The young Aboriginal men climb up the Uluru. And basically, it sounds like a dream quest, doesn't it? When you look into it,
yeah.
They go and once they come down, they're sort of like men. It's
it's a rite
of passage, yeah. And women do it, but there's two separate camps. But the women don't do it as high. The men go to the top, whereas the women don't. But everybody and anybody was at one point climbing this sacred site. And of course, obviously, very offensive to the Aborigines. But that practice stopped in about 1985. It's difficult. It's not easy. It's possible. You have to be very fit to do it. About 35 people have died climbing.
Oh, yeah. It is quite an unforgiving sort of climb. I can remember watching it on Blue Peter. They went on their summer holidays and this must be back in the 70s, and they went up Uluru, and one of the presenters had an asthma attack and halfway up. So, you know, that serves her right. But,
yeah. So you didn't get a Blue Peter badge that day?
Yeah, well, yeah, had to give that back at the end, yeah.
Dear.
Yeah, they had sort of like a pathway, and the unfortunate thing is now, and as it was made from red, sandstone, there is a sort of like a gully path up there now. But they had like a banister rail, sort of like a rope sort of banister going up, and you basically just pulled yourself up, and you went up there at your own risk. The Australians didn't really sort of mess around. They say, well, you can go up there, but if you fall off, don't come running to us.
Yeah, that's probably typical Australian.
Just use your common sense.
Well, nowadays you're not allowed to at all in any way, shape or form. It is pure Aboriginal rights now and totally sacred sites. So although you can go and see like the rock formations and various sites around it, they've actually set up like viewing platforms and stuff like that, so it helps to preserve the culture and the rock
Isn't
art.
it now isn't it now the responsibility of the Aganagnu tribe or whatever they're called?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been passed back to them, which I think is fantastic because it helps preserve it while people still being able to go and see it, and preserves their sacred rituals, like climbing it. I don't know if the Aborigines still do that, but that was part of it.
I should imagine
rite of passage.
Well, it's probably still a right to them. Whether they actually still do it or not, I don't know. But as I said at the start of the show, they've come to a very good arrangement, the Aborigines, because they're not selfish people. I mean, they do realise what they've got, and they do realise people want to go and see it and stuff like that. So there's like a little resort, not sort of right on top of Uluru, but a bit far back, it's sort of the Western hotel, swimming pool and all that sort of stuff. So you can go and stay there and then sort of have your little outback adventures around Uluru.
Go back to your 5-star restaurant on an evening.
Yeah, that's right. Something like that.
One thing I did find out about Uluru was there's loads of tales about this one, actually, whereas people that have visited have taken rocks from the area only to encounter, like, severe bad luck and misfortune. And they send them back. And the park rangers have a bit of a nightmare because to protect the sacred rites, they have to replace them exactly where they were taken from, which is impossible to do. You can imagine you just had this rock sent from God knows where and you've got to put it back. You're like, well, where the hell did that come from? So they actually use these rocks to actually repair certain, cracks and stuff that are appearing in Ayers Rock, which is natural erosion, and they're just putting them in back into the rock, as it were, without actually putting it exactly. They're still trying to preserve that sacredness. But this I found really interesting because this is a thing that comes up time and time again about somebody who's taken something without permission, as it were, and then encounters bad luck, and they put it onto the rock that they took. That you hear it in Hawaii, taking peridot off of the green beach. That's not allowed because that's bring you misfortune and bad luck. I even heard someone who took some gravel from 30 East Drive and sent it back to them because they'd had such bad luck since they'd taken the gravel. And even photographs, like Robert Dole, you're not supposed to take photographs of that. So, and this is actually linked to Uluru as well. And it's the only thing I could find in regards to like bad misfortune. There was no hauntings anything like that.
Didn't you find like a story about a bloke that took something?
Yeah, this was in the Canberra Times in 2017, I believe it was. It was a gentleman named Steve Hill. He visited in 2017 and took just a red rock. He didn't think anything of it. It was just like a keepsake from his time at Ayers Rock. Didn't believe the curse at all, obviously, otherwise he wouldn't have done it. And he had made an amazing amount of bad luck. I mean, a lot to do with technology. I love this one. He found himself randomly attacked by kangaroos whilst driving home.
I don't want to be attacked by a kangaroo, trust me.
They're bloody evil, aren't they, kangaroos?
Yeah. Especially the reds. They stand about 8 feet tall.
They're really big. And when they fight, it's like they box, don't they?
Oh, yeah. They used to, Victorian times, used to go in the ring and box a kangaroo.
Really?
Yeah, that's it.
They used to put boxing gloves on the kangaroo, and they used to give you a pair of boxing gloves. You climb in the ring, and there's very few people survived.
I can imagine that. They're vicious.
KO'd by a kangaroo,
but they're so powerful as well.
Yeah, by
the back legs. That's it.
And this is multiple as well. You're randomly attacked by kangaroos, not a kangaroo. So I can imagine this poor man on the drive home. He's being like, I just imagine it's almost like an Acme kind of cartoon in my head of him driving home and the occasional kangaroo coming out and having it with the 4x4 that he was driving with boxing gloves on now. Yeah, and his engine basically blew up, and photographs he'd taken on his smartphone disappeared.
Mm. Ooh. And spooky enough, his nickname was Lucky.
Now,
worried there, Kerry. I got a couple of sticks of rock from a Walton on the Naze the other day. And
sticks of rocks. They're disappearing fast, though, from what I understand.
Well, there's a few odd occurrences been happening in my flat. Perhaps I need to take them back down to the shop I got them from.
When did these occurrences start? When you bought the rocks in, or when you bought the box in?
Yeah, and I went to Walton on the Naze the other week.
Well, like I said at the top of the show, like I said about the rocks, people do send them back, and they get about 350 letters a year with people returning things that they've taken, even down to pebbles, twigs, sand, all sorts from that area. And they say ideally they'd appreciate it if people would actually stop pilfering random objects and sand from their potentially cursed sacred site.
Yeah, I think
I think it's quite a common thing, though. I mean, I know loads of people that have gone to historical places and taken something from the ground sometimes. And I mean, my dad's done it. He went to Athens, and there was a monument there. I can't remember particularly what one it was, but there was a stone on the wall. There was a loose stone on the wall, so he picked it up and he put it in his pocket, and he's got that.
People are magpies, aren't they? You only got to go like sand. Yeah. When you walk along the beach or something, your eyes are always searching and looking for a pretty rock or a pretty stone, or you know what I mean? I mean, how often did you do that with the kids when they were younger? Loads of times. Go sand picking, sand walking and that. Or if you go out for a walk in the woods or something, your eyes are always searching for conkers or acorns or interesting rocks or twigs or something. Do you know what I mean? Your eyes are doing that naturally.
I always used to pick up cuttlefish, the bone of cuttlefish.
Yeah, things like that.
Because when you put that in a parrot's cage.
People are magpies in that way. They like ownership of something. And if they've been somewhere that's touched them, they like to take a piece of that with them. So I can understand people doing it. I mean, there is no Aboriginal curse. I would just like to say that the Anangu do not recognise it as a curse. What they say is it's bad luck because it's disrespected their beliefs and their culture, and you've taken something sacred away from where it needs to be. So it's not recognised as a curse, but it is understandable to them because of their cultural beliefs.
Mm. Yeah. But anyway, we've nearly come to the end of the show already.
Oh, blimey. That went quick, didn't it, boys?
We haven't even... I tell you, Richard, he found a poltergeist case to discuss as well.
Yeah, he did. But going back to ufology, if you get a UFO flap... If you get a UFO flap, it'll be interesting to see, looking at that case, if there was a UFO flap at the same time, because very often you get the two at the same time. And there's links between poltergeist activity and UFO flaps. And you're not talking generalised poltergeist activity. It tends to be centred on a house. So that would be interesting further digging, to be honest with you. Maybe do a show on that all on its own.
I was hoping you was going to say that. I sort of sent it over where we're getting a bit sort of off topic towards the end of the show. But yes, that is a very interesting case, and it's not very well known about here in the UK, but it is one of the top cases recorded and witnessed. Certainly something to look forward to and watch this space.
I'd have just loved the name of it. I've not read much about it, to be fair, but the name is absolutely hilarious.
It's a classic.
Yeah. It's awesome. The Humpty Doo Poltergeist.
The Humpty Doo Poltergeist. In my head, when I first read that, Humpty Dumpty Poltergeist. I couldn't get
Absolutely.
the Humpty Doo straight away in my head. All I was thinking. But I'm interviewing Beth Darlington on Sunday, who is obviously Australian. So I'll ask her about that one and see if
It'd be interesting to hear take
do that.
On it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to be in there in the chat room to listen to that one.
The Humpty Doo Poltergeist.
To be honest, there's loads of places in Australia that have got some absolutely wonderful names.
They have. I say. We do though, as a West. I suppose it's a Western thing. We focus on the UK, America, Australia. We kind of we touch Europe a bit, But when we get down into the Africas and stuff, we might talk about their culture a little bit, but we kind of don't really look at that much. I think that's an area we need to rediscover, because you sort of go through like a little spat around the Mesopotamia area, Egypt, Afghanistan, Iraq, you know, the Med area, you know, coming off the Med, and then it goes into sort of nothing. It's an area that's fascinating in its own right. It has stories and myths and legends there, but rarely do we cover that side of things. So it's always interesting to branch out from the usual UK locations and mythologies and take a look at the deeper, the further culturals, I think.
I think later on in the year when I've literally run out of shows, I might actually do some foreign legends and stuff like that. So we could go into that area.
Paranormal concept off the beaten track.
Yeah. But I think we will need it. Kerry, you will need to get a map, I think, because your geography is shocking.
Shocking. I know. I own it.
Terrible.
I own it. Anybody who knows me knows not to rely on me for travel arrangements.
Yeah.
I don't leave my house. Everyone seems to think this is a joke. It isn't actually a joke. I never know where I'm going.
Particularly as tonight's subject was Uluru and Australia outback. American.
I know. Yeah. I said to Neil as he came off the back of the show, he said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "We're talking about the American outback." He went, "Oh, that would be an interesting one. I didn't know they had one." I was like, "What the hell?"
You heard it first. America has an outback. And on that bombshell, we've come to the end of the show. So I think for Kerry's sanity, I think I'm just going to have to say thanks to everybody for joining us in the chat room. Thank you for listening, and thank you for listening as a podcast when you get round to it. I'm sure there'll be others listening a little bit later. And thank you, Richard, for joining us tonight.
Thanks, guys. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
No problem. At least one of my guests knew where the outback was.
What are we talking about next week, Paul?
Oh, I don't know. Well, let's talk about what we've got coming up in the week first, and then we'll go on.
Okay. Tomorrow night on Haunted Histories, Penny has got the lovely Karen Besan in the studio with her, talking all about Warmley Clock Tower even. Then on Thursday evening, PSH Radio has got, the first of one of the Sage Paracon guests in the studio. The lovely ex-presenter of mine, Claire Hinks, is in the studio. She's there with those guys. Then on Friday evening on the Dark Mirror Show, well, this is a bit of a new concept for the old Dark Mirror Show. We're coming away from topics and we're taking a look at everything that's been going on in regard to news stories, in regards to the paranormal trending topics, all sorts of things we're going to discuss on the Dark Mirror Show. Then obviously on Sunday, the special interview is with myself interviewing the lovely Beth Darlington. I can't wait for that. She's just been to two of the paranormal conventions. The SPR and ASAP conventions have been going on in the last couple of weeks. She's been to both of those. And the lovely Aussie has actually moved to the UK, so I want to get her take on how things are for her and her impressions of the UK. So I'm looking forward to that one.
Fantastic. And on next week's Paranormal Concept Show, we're going to be discussing Shangri-La.
Oh.
That's what we're doing.
Oh.
Is that in
places?
I don't know where that
So
is.
it won't just be Shangri-La, it'll be other mythical places as well that crop up every so often. So, yeah. So, again, I want to thank everyone, and thank you guys for turning up and being a mine of information for tonight's show.
You're welcome. That sounded a little sarcastic, I'm just saying. You know.
Treat all your guests like this.
I know, right? I mean, guys, maybe he could do Shangri-La on his own next week.
Okay, so next week's cancelled. Oh, dear. Anyway, yes, thank you anyway. And yeah, it's a good night from me.
It's a good night from me.
And me.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.